Okay, go ahead and hit play. The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Gerhard Erich Schmidt. They were born on August 7th, 1937, and they served in the United States Air Force during the Cold War and Vietnam. They achieved the rank of Master Sergeant. We're recording this on November 30th, 2013. I am John Richter, and I am conducting the interview, no relation. Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
All right.
So, tell me, Mr. Schmidt, when were you born?
When was I born?
When and where were you born, yeah.
Where? Bronx, New York.
Okay.
1937, August.
Okay. And how did you end up joining the military, and like what kind of things in your childhood led you into the military?
More by accident than anything else. I have an older brother.
Okay.
And he had always been interested in aviation and flying, and I tagged along in those concepts and ideas. And so when it came time, couldn't find a job after coming out of high school that was worth anything. I inquired at the Air Force recruiter with a big grin on his face and says, "Come on in." So I did.
And where did you stay within New York, or did you?
No. Never was stationed in New York.
Okay.
Temporary duty-wise years later, but not permanently stationed in New York.
Okay.
My first base after basic training in El Paso, Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, and Amarillo, Texas, was El Paso, Texas.
Okay.
And from there, my active career started after basic training.
Okay. And after basic training, what kind of jobs did you do getting into?
The first thing you learn out on the flat line working on airplanes, you're the low man on the totem pole. Humoristically, we used to call guys like me third strut wipers. I mean, we were so far down the chain, the only thing they would let us do was clean a wheel or something. But that's part of the system. You learn and work your way up.
And what years was this when you first started out?
After basic training, 1957.
Okay.
And straight on onto the flight line, working on B-47 aircraft. Those were big bombers.
Big bombers. And I guess what was what were some of the things that you, like, how did you move up? What were some of the things that you started to do as you moved up?
Well, I was on the flight line working. On the flight line, and then I happened to marry Louise in El Paso.
Okay.
And my first base after that was in Albany, Georgia, working out on the flight line on B-52s, and then KC-135 jet tankers, and had the opportunity to get into the maintenance control office that actually controlled all the maintenance activities that were conducted out on the flight line. And it was a centralized controlled office. And I did the menial jobs, but I learned the system real quick, and was able to be fluent with up-to-date regulation changes and things like that. So I kind of worked my way up into it and got promoted a couple of times in that capacity. Finally became a senior controller. And then we went to Maine, got transferred up to Maine. Did the same type of job, and that was getting old. I says, I want to get my hands dirty again. Went out on the flight line, became a crew chief on a B-52 for the rest of the time that we were in Maine, before we got transferred again.
Where did you go after you got transferred again?
Spokane, Washington, Fairchild Air Force Base.
Okay.
Spokane, Washington, went back out on the flight line. And then the situation called Vietnam really got my attention and the Air Force's attention. So that's when I went to Vietnam.
And how long were you in Vietnam for?
I was actually 10 months.
10 months?
Out of a one-year tour. I was working with the flight line control section out on the flight line on C-47s. Electronic spy birds is what we were. What the guys did in the back end of the airplane, us guys, we just didn't ask. We found out later, but we didn't ask.
Okay. What kind of things did you see? Were there any memories or anything that stick out from being overseas in Vietnam, or?
difference between being home, separated between Louise and three little munchkins. Those three guys were kind of young at the time. They were living in Denver at the time, Denver, Colorado, where her family was. And during this interim period, that was the biggest thing. But we all were in the same boat, and we all try to survive and get home whenever we could, however, whenever.
Did you have any scares or any moments?
Yeah, there was one time in 4th of July, 1971. That night, they decided to zero in with rockets, and they came pretty close. Burned down a couple of barracks. Several people got killed and injured. But and I remember the explosion. You get woken up real fast. Boom! That kind of thing. But it wasn't too close to hurt me. But I know other folks that were. And that's the sad part. This was a quiet time in Vietnam. Not like the previous in 68, 69. This was past then. So military activity out in the field was not that active.
Interesting. And then, how long? You said you stayed there for about 10 months.
Yeah.
Did you just go home on your own accord, or did they just?
No, they sent me home.
They sent you home.
That was medevac.
Okay.
That's where I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes 42 years ago.
Interesting.
So I was not fit for service. 18 months later, when it was reevaluated, they say I was. And I said, okay, and I came back in and finished out until the rest of my time.
Interesting. Where did you end up going after Vietnam?
Vietnam was Travis Air Force Base in Fairfield, California. And we lived on base and at that time. And I was, again, involved with maintenance activities. But by this time, I became a trainer in our squadron. I trained new people coming in on the C-141 cargo aircraft. And until I retired, and I ran that program within the squadron. So that these young people coming in, by the time the program was ended within the squadron, they knew the flight line, knew how to operate, knew where to go, so they can be assimilated into the squadron, and at least they knew which way was up by the time they got done.
So out of all the aircraft that you worked on, which was probably the most interesting for you?
B-52.
B-52?
Oh, yeah.
What was it that made it so interesting to you? Was it just the size of it? Was it
the size,
intricacy?
the intricacy, the complications. Everything else was a toy because they were smaller.
I have a friend of, I know this is not even related, but I have a friend or two that their relatives flew B-52s, and that's always been an aircraft I've been enamored with as well.
Oh, I've got plenty of pictures. When this is over, I can show you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, when I was a crew chief, we had the attitude, at least I did, that we let the flight crews borrow my airplane and let them fly. That was my airplane.
That was the mentality?
That was it. That was my airplane. You want to fly it, don't break it.
Now,
and it kind of worked out that way.
How many people would you say work on a single aircraft at a time?
That all depends on the situation. Overall, it takes hundreds of people to keep one airplane in the air.
Okay.
As a support base. By the time you get supply, logistics, maintenance, operations, it's a complex web of different skills that have to come together to keep, and not just one aircraft. These same people all get together and keep the whole unit going. And it takes a lot of people to do that with very different, sometimes non-related skills. But coming together as one makes it happen, and the aircraft flies.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And performs the task that it's flying for.
Did you get a chance to go up in your B-52s?
Only once in a B-52. I was at that time, medically not cleared for flight. But I managed to get a local, so to speak, which was not in high altitude, and I relished that experience. That was fun. But I flown on KC-135 tankers a few times operationally, where we had to be transported from one place to another for training purposes.
Interesting. What what were some of the like the finer memories? Obviously, while you were overseas and in Vietnam and here at home, not everything was work necessarily. What were some of like the more fun or better memories of things on the job or?
Well, I always liked the job. I was very fortunate that all the jobs that I did in the Air Force, I really kind of liked, in various degrees. Whether it's refueling an airplane or 29,000 gallons in one airplane, give me a break. That took a while to get used to the idea of the immensity. Just knowing that the airplane you worked on is going down the runway, taking off at the time it was supposed to. You were part of the team, part of that group of people to make it happen.
That's good. How often would you say did things not go as planned or not go?
Oh, that's always a possibility. But when I was crew chief of my airplane, we named it Happiness. I named it Happiness Is, because the wing commander asked, "What's the happiness is on that airplane?" And I said, "Happiness is an on-time takeoff." After that, it's the crew's responsibility. It ain't mine, but I get it when it comes back. That was good satisfaction, and the crews knew it. That's the neat thing about flight crews and mountain maintenance personnel. If it wasn't for the maintenance personnel, the support people, supply people, all this, getting the airplane to launch, they wouldn't be able to fly the airplanes and do their work. At the same time, if it wasn't for them doing their work, we wouldn't have a job.
Okay.
So that kind of relationship, it worked together.
Now, did you have a fairly good relationship with the pilots and the crew members?
Yeah, I usually did.
That's good.
Yeah. So it relieved the tension.
Were they kind of Air Force hotshot kind of guys, or were they?
No, these were not pilots. These were not fighter pilots. You could always tell a fighter pilot, but not much. Off-flight fighter pilots will understand that. But anyway, no, because they, by and large, understood the system. They understood the system. They depended on us. We depended on them. So it's together.
Interesting. What I guess you'd say on an average day of work for you, what would be the average course of events from when you woke up to when you went to sleep?
Oh my goodness.
if you don't mind me asking.
No, I don't mind you asking. It all depended on where and when, what the job was.
Okay.
It could be like when I was a young guy just starting out. Okay, we would find out from the boss, okay, what are we going to do today? We got to move this airplane over here, we got to do this over there, we got to refuel these 3 airplanes because they just landed the night before, whatever it happened to be. And the responsibilities grew with rank, which is normal. And so by the time I get to be a crew chief, where's my airplane, what kind of shape it's in, now what do we got to do? What has been done, what needed to be done. A lot of coordination, in other words. There's always a lot of coordination. Because when there's no coordination, somebody's going to drop the ball, miscommunication, and you're getting into a technical field with miscommunication. That's when all kinds of hazards can pop up.
Okay. How would you say, especially the technology that you were working with from the time you got into the military until the time that you got out, how did the technology that you were using change?
It changed quite a bit. Before, when I came in, different aircraft had specific jobs. They cut that down over time to make multi-purpose. So they had 1 or 2 aircraft that could do 2 or 3 different of the same thing. Maybe not as good as an individual, but good enough to accomplish whatever the mission requirements were. And that changed. I was amazed of the level of technology of aircraft design and the building so short after World War II. See, when I joined the Air Force, it was only 11 years after World War II was over. So I was really, holy smokes, it didn't take that long to get to this stage in just technology. This before we got into the electronics like we have now in computers. This is all BC, before computers.
What were some? I guess what were some of the more difficult aspects of your job that looking back, it's you say like, man, this was something that was really tough back then that might have changed now.
Well, there's one thing that'll never change. Out on the flight line, it's wet, it's dark, it's cold, and windy, and sometimes all at the same time, depending on your location. I don't care where it is. Whether you're a civilian working on an airliner, or if you're in the Air Force, or Navy, or Marine Corps, Army, Coast Guard, out on the flight line, it can be tedious. But that's part of the job. It comes with the territory. You just do it and survive it and go through it and go to the next day.
Now, would you say that the flight line is a fairly dangerous place to be? Or
it could be if you're careless. You had to know where you were.
Is that one of the things that was very big for you and the people that you worked with, is maintaining that level of just awareness? And
it was no big deal because you did it. That was part of the job. You just knew where things were and what had to be done. Where things were located. Well, I need this. Well, I know I got to go over there. And you hear a noise, and oh, there's an airplane taxiing by. Okay, make sure everything's out of the way so they can get the airplane taxied by. Whatever. You just knew this as part of the job as you acquire and stay longer and longer.
Okay. Now, when you were living on base, especially over here in the U.S. and even over in Vietnam as well, how were your living conditions? Were you living in a house, homes by yourself? Were you living with infantrymen or other flight crews?
No, that was more basic. Single was basic training.
Okay.
But by the time we were living on base, the first time was in Spokane, Washington. The second time was at Travis. These were houses, single family units, very nicely furnished.
Okay. Did you? I guess when it comes down to food, a lot of people always talk about sea rations and things here and there. What was your experience like with the food?
Well, I ate at home for most of the time, except the worst food I ever had in the Air Force was in Fairbanks, Alaska. We were on temporary duty, and we had to go up there for 5 weeks. And this was in the fall of 57, 58, right in that time frame. And the Cold War was hot and heavy. We were with bombers, and that's kind of close to Russia.
Okay. just slightly closer.
Yeah, slightly closer than here. But that's the way it was. You just took it. That was the system, and you just dealt with it.
On a scale of 10 to absolutely terrible, how terrible was the food?
2 or 3 maybe. And that's being generous sometimes. But it was a short time. It was only 6 weeks.
Now, obviously, the Vietnam War for you, the experience there was a lot different. You weren't on the front lines as much, but at the Cold War for you, how was that different than I guess you'd say the active Vietnam War, being overseas?
Well, we were always, this is Strategic Air Command, and we were part of the system. We're ready to react to whatever the world situation was at that particular moment, as Cuban Missile Crisis, as an example. So we were always on alert. A certain portion of our B-52s and tankers were on constant alert. What that meant was all of these aircraft that were on alert could be launched and in the air within 15 minutes of notification. That's quite a feat right there. And we practiced it continuously, all hours of the day and night. Sometimes the klaxon would go off. The people on alert would go to those particular aircraft. We were just on the training section by this time, while this was going on, and they would prepare the aircraft to make sure they were all ready to go. And they could launch that portion of our fleet at that base within 15 minutes. That's quite a feat
Where were you stationed during the Cold War?
That was at El Paso, Texas, Biggs Air Force Base in El Paso, Texas, as well as Turner Air Force Base in Albany, Georgia, Loring Air Force Base in Caribou, Maine, and then Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington.
Did you have any times where you actually thought maybe this isn't a test and maybe we are actually sending people?
Yes, because you never know, especially if they pulled a test twice in a row on the same day within 2 hours of each other. But you just automatically reacted as you were trained to do. You did what you were trained to do, and that was part of the job. And when the airplanes rolled out to the end of the runway, and they go down the runway, and they stayed on the ground and taxied back, okay, it was a test. Because on the ground crew, we would not know. We just helped launch the airplanes, that was it. And we just stand there. And then when the airplanes come back, okay, it's not a test. It's just a test, it's not the real thing. If they had launched, I don't know what we would have done.
Do you feel like had you seen them launch, do you think it would have set in a little bit to you, or do you feel like you would have been at the point with your job where it would have been you'd just been able to just ignore the fact that that plane just actually did take off and you had to kick out the rest of them as well?
We would have been, okay, had that happened, the people on alert, us that were on alert at that time, was a constant rotation basis. Not all the airplanes were on alert at the same time. The early years in SAC, it was 50%. So if you had 15 airplanes or 16 airplanes on a base, 8 of them were on alert. Same thing with the tankers. And had they launched, we would have been assimilated back to our regular jobs with the rest, getting the rest of the fleet generated and getting those prepared to go, because we knew something good was not happening.
Very interesting. Were you ever given any firearms or any weapons during your training, or were you?
Yes. In the Coast Guard Reserve, we had to get qualified in a .45 pistol.
Okay.
That was experience, having zero experience with that. And then get in the Air Force, basic training in the Air Force. And then before we went to Vietnam, we had to get qualified in an M16. But thank goodness the Marine Corps and the Army kept out at the safety out around the base, so us guys working on airplanes didn't have to worry about it.
Would it be one of those things where you just preferred not to deal with firearms and prefer to work?
Yeah, it was just not part of the job. It was just not part of the job. Had it been part of the job, then you just do it.
Interesting. I guess looking at, have you been in touch with or looked over any of the aspects of what your job was during your time of service nowadays, and looked at, like, compared and contrast the things that
yeah, it was different. It was different. The number of aircraft has decreased dramatically. Like the number of B-52s went down from 600 or 700 on active duty down to 75. That's a huge change. The tanker fleet has been cut down accordingly as far as their numbers are concerned. And more of an aspect of Air Force General now, it's air mobility. But you still have to have the bombers and tankers there, because they were used in every conflict that we've had since Vietnam. B-52s have been involved, as well as other aircraft and support, depending on the missions.
Interesting. Now, during your service, did you make any good friends or have any people that you still keep in touch with to this day? Or?
Oh yeah, there's a few. Not that many, because it's hard to stay friendly with someone with time now and distances and things of this nature. But there's a few, sure.
Especially moving around.
When we're moving, we were very, very fortunate. The moving gods smiled on us, as I put it. We didn't have to that often.
Even after 5 or 6 moves to different bases?
Well, over 20 years, like say Vietnam, as Afghanistan is now in Iraq. There have been guys and gals have been over there 2, 3, 4 times. one right after the other with barely a year break in between. Myself, personally, I didn't have to go through that ordeal, or my family. I was just once, thank goodness.
Okay. That's good. You said you had a couple pictures and things that you wanted
Yes.
to show.
Well, they're the B-47s.
Okay.
This was Boeing's.
Do you mind if we pull them down real quick?
This is a B-47 flying. It was absolutely awesome. 1957, I saw my first B-47, and frankly, sitting there out on the flight line looking at this aluminum beast, which it wasn't as far as I was concerned, they're going to let me work on this and pay me too? I was in awe of what this here. And historically, this aircraft first flew 3 years after World War II was over.
Wow.
Yes, that was a quantum leap technology forward. And it developed into the intermediate bomber before the B-52 came about. And with 6 jet engines. This one particular photograph does not show the external fuel tanks that we all had on ours, but to extend the range. It was a 3-man crew, a pilot, a co-pilot, and a radar navigator bombardier. And it was an awesome bird. It was an awesome bird.
Interesting. That's really cool. I wasn't actually aware of the B-47.
Well, most people aren't.
No.
Because they phased out in the early 60s. They were phased out as B-52s came online.
Okay.
This was considered a medium-range bomber. It held one nuclear weapon, as opposed to a B-52, which could carry a lot more. But that's B-47.
What other, you were saying, the B-52s?
Yeah, there's a picture which I cannot get to.
That's fine. See if I can turn this real quick.
If you can see that picture up there, that's a KC-135 tanker.
Okay.
Refueling in the air a B-52D bomber. This is taken before Vietnam. I could tell by the colors. The B-52, that B-52, model B-52, were the ones that were converted and did most of the aerial bombing work in Vietnam.
Okay.
The tankers were not modified. They didn't have to.
And when you say you can tell the difference because of the colors, what do you mean by that?
Well, they were all aluminum, as this picture shows. Aluminum top and white bottom. The white bottom was on there because they were a nuclear bomber. And in case they had to drop a weapon, the aircraft and the crew could be protected against radiation from the bomb blasts. And that's why the white bottom.
And why the white bottom, I guess? What does that...
The white bottom, it reflected and was a special protective paint.
Okay.
To protect the crew and the airplane from radiation.
Interesting.
So once they dropped, they had to do all kinds of evasive maneuvers to get out of the way. Mm-hmm. A nuclear bomb makes it's undescribable. And with radiation. And they're close. So they want to get out of the way. And the white radiation paint, anti-radiation paint, for lack of a better term, helps protect and radiate back so the crew and the aircraft can be protected so they can survive.
Okay. I guess with your time working on airplanes and stuff, did you ever have to manage payloads or anything like that?
No, that was not my job.
Okay.
Munitions Maintenance Squadron. This was all part of a schedule of operation, and when we had the airplanes ready for them to upload, and when the training mission was done, they downloaded.
Okay.
That was, no, we just stood back and let them do their thing.
Did you get to witness or watch it all the time?
Oh yes. First time you get into a bomb bay and there's a nuclear bomb hanging there, you hide there. Oh boy.
How many? That seems very interesting to me. How many nuclear munitions would you say that you saw?
Well, the B-47 only carried one, and it was big. Mm-hmm. But the technology hadn't gotten to the point yet to make them twice as or 3 times as powerful or more and make them small.
Okay.
So a B-52, the ones that were I was a crew chief of, they can carry 4.
So you on any given day you'd walk up under there, and there'd be 4 large nuclear weapons strapped up underneath a B-52, even just on training days?
Not on training.
Okay.
No. The only time that they were actually in the aircraft were when they were on alert and ready to launch.
Interesting.
That was part of preparing an aircraft for alert duty. Once the maintenance and everything else was done on the aircraft, everything's operational. The last thing to do was munitions maintenance squadron would come out and upload the aircraft with the nuclear weapons and all the top secret stuff that goes on with it. And then we would tow the aircraft onto the alert pad, and the flight crew assigned to that aircraft would come out. They would do their pre-flight and get everything ready to go, and everybody stands back.
Interesting. Did you ever have any scares or any moments that you were working where, you know, it was just an average day and all of a sudden something made you go, oh crap, something
Yeah,
bad?
that's always in there. This happened, gosh. I was TDY, temporary duty, to Plattsburgh Air Force Base upstate New York, doing alert duty. We rotated every 2 or 3 months. And being from New York, I wanted to get closer to home. This is before I met Louise. And we were up there. There was an accident on the flight line, and had one of the fuel tanks of an airplane ruptured, and 1,800 gallons of jet fuel went all underneath all of the parked aircraft. Yes. And power units were running, and everybody was hoping and praying that no sparks. So that was a few tense week until they got everything flushed down and safe again. It took them almost a week.
Wow.
Because it was a large volume.
Just that much fuel out on the deck?
Yes, because if it had lit, oh boy, 10 nuclear armed aircraft would have gone boom.
Wow.
Not the nuclear part, the warheads.
Yes.
Which are conventional.
Which still
is a 500-pound bomb or whatever it is.
They still pack a punch.
Yeah, they pack a very big punch. They're designed not to go off in case of situations like that. But yeah, it was tense.
How many? I guess you see kind of some of the videos here and there of you know, behind the scenes practice runs, testing, airplane crashes like that. How many times did somebody crash one of your airplanes?
Nobody.
Nobody crashed any of your
airplanes?
airplanes?
No, thank goodness.
What would have been your reaction had they crashed one of your airplanes?
I would have been very, very scared. First question is, did anybody get out?
Yes.
Did everybody get out? And I would have been very, how do you phrase? I hope I didn't do anything wrong to cause it.
Interesting.
That's
the first reaction.
The first reaction is, did everybody get out of the air? Did everybody survive?
Interesting.
That was, everything else is secondary after that.
Yeah.
Oh, darn. You know, but if everybody did not survive, well, different reaction. But I never had to go through that. Never.
Interesting. Well, that's good. After 20 years, nobody didn't have to deal with that. That's good though. That's good. If you knew somebody that was looking to go into the same area of expertise that you did, nowadays, obviously, you said it's a lot different. What are some things that you would suggest to somebody going into that same work?
It's, what are your expectations, that person? There's more jobs available. There's more of it, first of all, because of the technology. That was non-existent. Again, BC, before computers and the electronics to what it was. It was amazing, the electronics that were available then and were being used that wowed us. But as far as somebody coming in, if that's what they would like to do, it's a regimented, it's a discipline when you're going in, but when you're out on the job, naturally you got to do the work.
Yeah.
You got to perform as you're trained to perform, whatever that job happens to be. As far as women are concerned, there's a huge list of jobs that are available now that were not available to women back then. And so that's all complex is completely changed. If somebody likes a little bit of adventure, that helps. Because you don't know exactly, you make out a dream sheet. That's what it's called. Where would you like to be stationed? Every now and then somebody actually gets to where they want to go.
Every once in a while.
Every once in a while. I've heard it happening, but yes, because you get used to the job. That's part of the commitment that you're making when you say, okay, I promise to stay in the Air Force or Army or Marine, Coast Guard, Navy, whichever it happens to be, whichever branch. And would you like to do that type of work? And there's a better screening process now compared to way back in the 50s when I joined in. And there was a screening process, but not very thorough like it is today. It was just different.
Okay. Now, how did you end up, I guess, ending your time in the service? Did you just eventually say, you know, enough time has passed and it's time to move on to something different? Or?
Well, working with new people coming in. These were people that had already gone through basic training.
Uh-huh.
They had gone to tech school, so they knew the difference between a hammer and a screwdriver and a wrench, hopefully. And the front end of an airplane from the back end of an airplane. You know, so they had the basics.
Uh-huh. We
We then took these abilities and fine-tuned them to a particular aircraft, and that was happened to be that one up there, the C-141A.
Okay.
And that was my last job. And we took these people through a 6-week program whereby we trained them on different systems in the classroom, then took them out on the flight line. This is how you do it.
This is the actual job.
Yeah, you read it in the book, you have training aids and things like this. Okay, grab your hat and coat. We're going out on the flight line. Now do it.
Interesting.
And everybody does it. Whether it's, here's where you go to pick up your toolbox.
Uh-huh.
And this is where you go to get this. And this is where you meet. And you start at the beginning. And here's the aircraft documentation that you have to be concerned with when you're working on aircraft. Okay. Involved with aircraft maintenance. So by the end of 6 weeks, they knew the flight line. They knew the system. So whoever they were assigned to, they already knew where things were.
That's good.
Made transition a lot easier.
That's good. Now, after you got out of the military, how did your love of airplanes, what did you do with your love of airplanes, and how did that continue on out of?
That took a while.
Okay.
That took a while. First of all, I had to feed mama and 3 boys.
Uh-huh.
And I could not find a job and there at that time. Mm-hmm. We liked the area. We bought a house before retiring. Saw the handwriting on the wall. And, well, the handwriting on the wall actually was looking at the birth dates of the people coming in, that they were born after I first enlisted. And I go, okay. But anyway, that being said, the time had come. Mm-hmm. And we planned for it best we could. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I couldn't find was a job. The first couple of jobs were not very much, and retirement pay was not that great. And Louise found a position with the local school district working as a teacher's aide. So we managed to get over the hump, and I started my own business, nice. Which was a mobile truck repair. Vacaville truck service, mobile truck repair service. I did that for 15 or 16 years.
Nice. Okay.
Then I had some more free time in my hand, and the museum, the Air Museum out of Travis, okay. Called, and we called and got in touch again because they had wanted me to help, and but I couldn't make that kind of a commitment. Yeah. Because I was a sole employee, and so I was working by myself. And when situation where I had more free time, then things led to that. I was a docent tour guide at the Travis Air Museum in Fairfield, California, before we moved here to South Carolina. And I continued doing the same thing, different air museum up in Charlotte.
Okay, cool. So, are you still working with the Air Museum up there?
No, I retired from that. I retired from that.
And now it's just your play.
I look at pictures and I read stories and things like this and look at history. Now there's aviation history. That picture was taken, what, 1957, I believe?
Mm-hmm.
That's a copy of just about every aircraft that was in the Air Force inventory at that time.
Wow.
At that time. That's quite a fleet.
Might have to find that picture online.
I don't know the origin of that picture. It would be nice to find out for historical purposes, because I can tell you the history of just what these type of aircraft and the technologies that were involved. Some were being phased out, some with the new coming in, but within the same picture.
Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, Mr. Schmidt, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm glad you're interested.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Likewise.